We are on item number 21 on our agenda. Item number 21 is to consider the contract for our below market rate or BMR program administration. Mr. City Manager Jim Troop, who do we have to provide the presentation? And before you hand it over to that person, I'll refer this quickly to the person who pulled it. But who's providing the presentation, Jim?
That will be, hold on, I just had it here. I got that before.
Would that be Carrie or somebody else?
No, it's actually going to be.
Mr. Troop, I could help out on that.
Ben?
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll start with Ben. Ben can then.
Okay, Ben Fu, Director Fu of our planning department. I know it's not called that anymore, but so let me see who pulled the item. That is number 21 was Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Moore, did you want to speak briefly to the reason that you pulled the item?
Sure. There were a couple of things that I thought were kind of interesting here. One was the length of time that it was put out for people to apply to have this contract. I thought it was also interesting the number of units which are in the BMR program and the number which are expiring. And I was a little bit concerned about that in relation to the entirety of the contract, because it looks like the city will be losing a significant number of these BMR units, and I think we should probably also highlight that information for the general public to be aware of.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Moore. And so let me go ahead and hand this off to Director Ben Fu. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council members. Ben Fu, Director of Community Development. I think considering there's some specific questions from Councilmember Moore, I probably just hand off to Carrie Huser, our housing manager, that can explain this a little bit in a little greater detail instead of me actually doing a presentation, if that's okay with you, Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
Carrie?
Sure. Good evening, Mayor Paul and council members. My name is Carrie Huesler, the housing manager, and I am here this evening to bring you the contract for below market rate, otherwise known as BMR, program administration. This item went before the Housing Commission on March 10th, and I am here to present the Commission's recommendation to select Rise Housing Solutions, which is formerly known as Hello Housing, as the city's BMR program administrator, and award a 4-year consultant agreement to serve the needs of the city's existing BMR program consisting of 242 units. I am available to answer any questions you may have, and I can provide the answers to Councilmember Moore's question, Mayor, when you'd like.
Oh, please go ahead and incorporate those answers into your presentation, Carrie. Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of the length of time for the proposal, we did send out the RFQ to over 200 contacts, and we are pretty familiar with the agencies that serve BMR programs in the Santa Clara County and beyond. And we received the 2 proposals from House Keys and from Rise Housing. And so we did review all proposals. We did not get any inquiries from any other agencies, including agencies that serve existing programs in Santa Clara County. So we felt like we did a pretty good job of reaching out and inviting in applicants. In terms of the units expiring and the length of the contract, we chose to present a 4-year contract this evening to manage the existing 242 units, knowing that approximately 67% of the city's BMR program will be expiring in 5 to 6 years by the end of 2030. So let's say 5 to 8 years. And the reason for that is that the program will change significantly at that time due to the reduction in units, unless the city is able to find other means to build additional BMR units or to preserve the existing units. So we wanted to acknowledge that the current landscape of the program will forecast and will change in 4 years. And I believe that's all the questions, Councilmember Moore, but please let me know if I can provide any additional information.
Okay, thank you very much, Carrie. Any other questions from council before we move this to members of the public? I don't see any hands raised on this item from members of the public, but I do see a hand raised from Councilmember Moore.
Okay, Thank you, Mayor Paul. This is a question for Carrie. So if 67% of the 242 units are expiring, that's we're losing 162. Is that correct? And I'm kind of wondering. I'm going to assume those are all rental units and not the for sale units. So could that be clarified a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. They are all rental units, and I will work to pull up the exact number. I do have a chart, and it is in the housing element as well, and I'll see if I can quickly get you the data. It's all rental units, and these are the inclusionary units that are built into the market rate projects spread throughout the city. So it will be, it's not a complex like Vista Village where we could work with a nonprofit owner and incentivize them. This is market rate development that was scattered throughout the city, and they're coming up on the end of previous regulatory agreements at the 30-year mark. And so the city's, to anticipate a question, the city's current BMR regulatory agreements tend to align with a 55-year tax credit time limit or a 99-year preferred city regulatory agreement limit. So we don't enter into these 30-year agreements anymore, but this will be a big reduction for the program.
Through the mayor, I have one last question. So the request for RFQs, the RFQ request for qualifications, the RFQ was out for 12 days, and maybe this is a question for the manager or the attorney. Is this typical? Because it just seemed to me that it was kind of brief. And for other contracts, is this kind of a normal time frame as well? I'm just in general curious about that.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. Would our city manager or city attorney care to answer that question?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. It does depend. They're RFPs, RFQs, they vary on length of time. There is no set time. I would maybe ask our planning director or CCT director to maybe ask him if there was a reason for the 12 days, but there has been, I've been where it's been 10 days, it's been 15 days, 30 days, it's been longer. But I don't know if, Ben, if you had anything behind that.
Sure, I can certainly add a little bit of that as well. You know, there's no typical sort of length of time depending on the project itself. I think this particular project we have done, Carrie has done a significant amount of sort of outreach already, so to alert providers that this is coming, and so that and also too is considering the timing and expiration of the contract. We want to make sure that it's out there as quickly as possible. In a length of time, it doesn't necessarily get you any more quality applicants. So this is what we had decided on for this particular one.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. And one last question. Since these are expiring within 5 to 8 years, is this going to have any impact to our housing element and the number of units which we're trying to locate? Because it seems to me that HCD could argue that we need to add on 162 more BMR units.
Okay, I see our city attorney turning on his microphone. Chris?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that the RENA allocation is directed at the production of new units, and old units could leave the market for a number of reasons or change affordability status for a number of reasons. And I don't believe that those are debited against your RENA allocation, but I will confirm that.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's go to our member of the public with a hand raised. That is Peggy Griffin. And I'll remind all members of the public, whether they're on Zoom or calling in live or have access to email, that you'll need to indicate that you'd like to speak on this item before the first member of the public is done speaking. That would be Peggy. Please raise your hand on Zoom, or press *9 on the phone, or fill out a blue card if you're in person, or email cityclerk@cupertino.org if you're only accessible through email. So welcome, Peggy. You'll have 3 minutes.
evening, council and staff. I support the Housing Commission's recommendation. And I'd like to again thank the council for having this item first be reviewed by the Housing Commission. If the city will lose 67% of its BMR rental units between July 2026 and January 2028, I'd like to ask the council to please ask the Housing Commission, in conjunction with Rise Housing, to figure out some way these BMR units can be preserved. And also, if they can be recaptured, can they be included as part of the RENA numbers for the next cycle? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. And we don't have further hands raised from our Zoom or call-in functionality. Do we have any blue cards, Madam City Clerk, on this item?
No, Mayor.
I see a member of the public with a hand physically raised. I don't have a blue card in front of me, but I might have. Okay, Jennifer, why don't you fill out a blue card after your comment, and then we'll go ahead and recognize Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
I'm sorry, I don't know, it was 20 and then 22, and this number is, this is
21.
highly confusing.
Yeah, welcome.
Anyway, yes, I didn't plan to speak on this one, but I am appalled. I mean, if it's nothing, it's not the city's fault. I am appalled that we're losing 67% of our BMR units. I was around when the city started this. I mean, that was the first thing. I was so glad when we annexed into the city that Cupertino had the BMR units. That's why this is the problem with Sacramento messing around with the internals of cities. I would like to know how many apartment complexes these BMR units are in, whether I'm assuming that when these developments were put in, oh God, this goes back 2003. Every single development we used to be able to get BMR units out of. This is probably the Cali Mill apartment complex, I forgot, Veranda, or whatever it's called. We should be, I guess the problem is that we only negotiated for 30 years. In my mind, we need to go to permanent. We don't know what RENA Land, HCD, they are out to get every city in this state. They are going to nail us and ream us in every way possible. But it's not our fault that the BMR units are going to be going back to, I guess, whoever owns these apartment complexes. They're going to be charging $2,500 or $3,000 market rate for those units, and we are going to get reamed by HCD. I can tell you right now that it'll be front page news. Cupertino is losing 67% of its BMR units, and they're so awful they don't want to house people. Well, I'm sorry. I was there when the BMR units were there before there was the HCD involvement. There was no YIMBY. We looked out for our people in our city. And I don't want to have HCD coming back and slapping it in our face. I am a grown adult with a bachelor's degree, and I am not going to put up with this claptrap anymore from YIMBY Land and HCD telling me that I am not smart enough to live in my own city. It is a bunch of hokum. I don't believe it. I never believed it. And I think HCD needs to get out of the business of micromanaging everything in every single city.
15 seconds.
We need to try to get these units back, and we need to have our developers step up and give us BMR units. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And that should conclude the blue cards. I don't have any further blue cards here. Madam City Clerk, do you have any emails from members of the public for this item?
No, Mayor.
Okay, we'll bring it back to council on the dais. Do I have a motion for purposes of further discussion on this item number 21? Council Vice Mayor Chow, would you like to make a motion?
Okay, I move to authorize the city manager to execute consultant agreement with Rise Housing Solutions for BMR program administration not to exceed $1.5 $1,147,206.
Okay, and just to clarify, the amount was $1,147,206. That's correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Would anyone like to second Vice Mayor Chow's? I saw a hand raised, and Councilmember Woolley, would you like to second?
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Does anyone care for discussion at this point prior to taking a vote on this motion? I see Councilmember Moore with a hand raised, as well as Vice Mayor Chow. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mayor Paul. I was just wondering if there is any way that the city can negotiate with these BMR property owners in order to have some continuation. Is there some way that the city can incentivize them? And if we do so, what benefit can we have, such as including these numbers in our next RENA cycle, the one we're working on right now?
Yeah, Councilmember Moore, I actually totally agree with the sentiment expressed by the members of the public on this one. The one item I've had to recuse myself in 7.5 years had to do with an apartment complex close to where I live that was actually not treating the BMR units as it still had under BMR units allocation as BMR units because it was within 500 feet of my house. I think the industry standard, as these things go, 30, 35 years ago, however long it was, it seemed like a really long time. That was generationally long. It was a BMR unit. I think there's a shifting in the attitude at this point, from what I know. But let me turn this over to our staff. I think if you're in the business of owning these units, you're making business decisions, right? I don't know what kind of leverage we would have necessarily at this point. To Jennifer Griffin, the member of the public's comment, I don't think we would get lambasted because these terms are pretty much universal throughout the cities. But I've seen a number of things happen in our city that, don't happen to other cities. And, I have various theories as to why that happens, but I don't think it's necessary to share those right at the moment. Jim, Chris, would you like to speak to, that particular comment as to the time limitation of a lot of these BMR units that are getting off of the inventory of BMR very soon here?
Thank you, Mayor. I can get with Ben and his staff and see if there's a discussion. If there's a possibility, I think what you said is it's coming down to a business decision for the property owner, but if there's something they say, well, if the city can do X, Y, or Z, we might consider it. It never hurts to ask somebody, so.
Yeah, it's a good answer. Thanks, Jim. Yes, Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. I was just wondering if it is possible that there could be some grant money out somewhere, whether it be Measure A funds or some other source that could potentially help to incentivize these owners, since they've had them for the past nearly 30 years now as BMRs, if they would be willing to continue it.
Right, grant money, and I would add to that displacement. So. Would either Jim or Chris or anyone on Zoom care to speak to those issues?
Ben, do you have any thoughts, or Carrie?
Yeah, we can certainly reach out to the property owners, but I think, Mayor, you're right, and it becomes a business decision. These property owners purchased these units back in the day with a certain expectations, and times have changed. That's why you're seeing a lot more as 99 year limitations as opposed to 55. And we can certainly reach out and see if there's a desire to continue participation in our program and sort of what sort of incentives that we can provide. But is a significant change in terms of the property value as well. So, but we can certainly reach out and find out.
Okay, thank you, Director Fu. And Vice Mayor, I do see your hand raised. I do want a follow-up on that comment that I just made, though. What do we do about the issue of displaced people here? What happens to the denizens of a lot of these BMR units? And Ben or Carrie, if you want to speak to that, I would imagine that you'd be the closest in our city staff to these issues.
I can speak to that, Mayor. So in terms of the unit expiration, we will have 6 of the 9 developments that will expire by January of 2028. And there's staggering expiration dates, and we will begin the transition plan a few years in advance. And we will work closely with our BMR program administrator to ensure that our BMR program participants have adequate notice, whether they are longer term eligible tenants or whether they are new tenants moving in for a term of a year or two prior to the expiration. So that is something that is on our radar. And in terms of funding to support the comment about market rate business decision, we do have an eye on the new funding that comes from HCD, funding that comes from the county looking for preservation dollars. And we are scrubbing every possible source that we can. And as we come closer to these expiration dates, we will make it more and more of a priority to accommodate our BMR clients and to also try to incentivize our inclusionary owners, our inclusionary rental owners. The owners meaning the property owners, not
Understood.
yeah, thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Carrie. Vice Mayor.
Okay. So, Mayor, first, when I raised my hand earlier, you asked if anyone wants to make a motion. I made a motion, but I was expecting to be able to comment right after I made my
Oh,
motion.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Well, you have the floor now.
So, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I heard that there is a low-income housing tax credit that has been used to subsidize the acquisition, construction, and the rehabilitation of affordable rental housing. I'm not sure if it's applicable to inclusionary rental units, but I remember that the Treasurer of California, they have a program also to rehabilitate this kind of BMR units that's phasing out. So maybe there are other mechanisms out there, or maybe we should lobby for a new state law. And so I know that we're not going to add new items, but this seems to be an item that it's urgent kind of things. So some of them will expire in 2026. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you for that, that thought and commentary, Vice Mayor Chow. Councilmember Willie.
So one question, the displacement item would be of concern to me. It seems to me that didn't our governor sign a California-wide rent control item?
I think there was a rental moratorium. I'm not sure what
Carrie might
the
be
lifting of
able
that
to answer that.
I think we're right on it.
I thought that there was a statewide rent control item, and if so, the question would be that for these below market rate units, if they were to revert back to so-called market rate, wouldn't they be subject to the, if there were rent control, the increments that would be allowed normally for rent increases, as opposed to going from something that's a BRM all the way up to market rate in one increment that really would displace people. And so that would be my question, which Carrie may or may not be able to answer.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Councilmember Willie. Carrie, since you've been identified specifically, did you want to speak to the comment and question by Councilmember Willie?
Sure. I understand that there was a moratorium on rent during the pandemic, and I believe that's expired. I can seek guidance from our rental agency, Project Sentinel, on the current status of any statewide rent control. I know we don't have anything at the local level, but we can take a look at, and I'm just learning now there is not a statewide rent control, but I can find out more details as well on anything that might be in the pipeline and bring it back if there is such.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Any other comments? We do have the motion on the table. I don't see any further hands raised, and so at this point, I will ask that we vote with our lights on this motion, item number 21.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Let's go on to item number 22. The subject is to consider a master funding agreement between the city and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Supplement 1 to the master funding agreement accepting grant funds awarded to the city for updating the Heart of the City specific plan. Mr. City Manager, who do we have first off from staff on this as a presentation?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I'm going to go back once again to Ben Few, our CDD Director.
Okay, so before we go back to Director Fu, let's go to Councilmember Moore briefly. Councilmember Moore, you initially pulled this. Did you want to speak to this before the staff presentation?
No, we can just move to the staff presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Councilmember Moore, and back to the City Manager and Director Fu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. City Manager, and City Council. Good evening, Ben Fu, Director of Community Development. With me tonight is Erica Proveda, project planner on this particular project here. As you recall, we brought this to your attention a couple months ago, and most recently we took it to Planning Commission as well to get additional input. I think Erica has a presentation for you, kind of go over the a little refresher course on what the item is, and then the result of the commission and also our recommendation. And we'll be happy to answer questions after that as well. So with that, Erica.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Erica Proveda, Associate Planner with Community Development Department. Tonight I'm here to present on a master funding agreement between the city and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, as well as the $400,000 in Priority Development Area Planning Grant Funds awarded to the city for updating the Heart of the City specific plan. So staff presented the PDA planning grant item to City Council back in February. And at that meeting, Council deferred its decision and requested that the item be presented to Planning Commission for its recommendation. And at the March 22nd meeting, Planning Commission recommended to staff to accept the awarded $400,000 in PDA planning grant funds and to time the work for the Heart of the City update to wait until after the housing element update has been certified. To streamline grant funding distribution, MTC grant recipients will be required to enter into a master funding agreement for any competitive and non-competitive grants. The master funding agreement would be effective from fiscal year 2021-2022 through 2031-32. And will act as an umbrella agreement by setting the main terms and conditions over the next 10 years so that they do not have to be renegotiated every time a grant is awarded to the city. Rather than execute a full contract for each grant awarded to the jurisdiction during the agreement period, the city would only have to submit what's called a supplement to the agreement along with the project scope and budget milestones. And as an example, the city has been awarded a PDA planning grant to update the Heart of the City specific plan. If the City Council accepts these funds, it would be the first MTC grant awarded to the city under the master funding agreement and would be considered Supplement 1. MTC will allow the city until April 30th to execute the master funding agreement and the supplement of the PDA planning grant. We previously went over the background of the Heart of the City at the February meeting, so I won't spend too much time here, but just as a reminder, the PDA planning grant funds are intended to update the Heart of the City specific plan as it's located in the VTA cores, corridors, and station area PDA. As for some background for the planning grant, in January 2021, ABAG and MTC invited jurisdictions to submit applications. Staff did apply in February 2021 for the PDA planning grant, and we were awarded $400,000 in grant funds back in spring 2021. A few of the primary goals of the planning grant include increasing housing supply, reducing VMT, increasing alternative modes of transportation, and retaining and expanding community assets, services, and retail. The scope of work complies with ABAG and MTC's grant guidance and outlines tasks related to public engagement, community assessment, and policy development, and adopted plan documents. To use the grant funds, the specific plan update must meet all the deliverables outlined in the scope of work, including all assessments and analysis, as well as establishing a community advisory council and technical advisory committee. The required CAC would be a representative group of residents, local employees, community organizations, and service providers in the specific plan area. And this TAC would be a representative group of local, county, and regional agencies and service providers, such as transit agencies and the MTC grant manager. The role of the CAC and TAC is limited to reviewing draft plan materials and informing the planning process, and neither group would act as an advisory or decision-making body for the plan update. As mentioned, Planning Commission recommends that the city pursue the grant and issue a separate RFP for a consultant for the specific plan update. But they do note that the consultant should not begin work until after the 6th cycle housing element update has been certified by HCD. And based on this timeline, we would wait to bring a consultant authorization or contract to City Council until after the housing element has been certified. And based off of MTC's deadline, all tasks and deliverables outlined in the scope of work would need to be completed within 3 years of contract approval. Staff would return to council in order to budget the $400,000 in grant revenue in conjunction with a consultant scope of work, as well as any requested additional funds and contract. Due to the fact that a master funding agreement would be required for any future competitive and non-competitive funding from MTC, staff is recommending that council adopt the draft resolution, attachment A, to authorize the city manager to enter into a master funding agreement between the city and MTC. Staff is also recommending that the city council consider adopting draft resolution attachment B to accept the PDA planning grant funds from MTC, authorize the city manager to execute the supplement agreement for the PDA planning grant, and to direct staff to present consultant agreement after the housing element update has been certified by HCD. And upon authorization from council, the city manager can execute the master funding agreement and PDA planning grant supplement prior to April 30th. And staff will return to council following the HCD certification for next steps. And we're available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Any questions of the presenter for the presentation before we move this to comments from the public? I see Councilmember Moore has her hand raised.
All right.
Councilmember Moore.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the presentation, Erica. I was wondering if you could go back one slide before the questions slide, if we could take a look at that. I just wanted to read it again.
Sure. All right, next steps.
I believe so. Okay. Okay, and so why is this prior to April 30th, 2022 in the first bullet point?
Sure, so we have had talks with MTC, and based off of their grant guidance, they are asking for grants to be authorized within 6 months of being awarded. So technically that would have been a couple months ago. However, several jurisdictions are running into this issue of it just taking a bit more time to get to this point. So in talking with MTC and ABAG, they are allowing us until the end of this month to authorize the grant.
Okay, there was a slide that mentioned contract approval. Could you please clarify who would be doing that contract approval?
Or is this contract approval for the master funding agreement or for the consultant?
I think it was for the consultant, but you would need to scroll back a few slides.
Okay, sure. I'll continue to scroll until.
Yeah, so maybe it's this one, MTC, go back one. I think we just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, other way, yeah. Okay, so MTC deadline, 3 years from contract approval. What are they referring to?
Contract approval would mean the master funding agreement as well as the supplement one.
Okay, and last question on the presentation, the goals, if we could look at the goals page.
Sure.
It's kind of early on.
Yeah. There we are.
Okay, so grant goals, increasing housing supply and jobs. That one kind of raises a red flag for me. That's the jobs portion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, I do remember that came up during the last meeting as well. And we did address that in the staff report, just to make sure that it was clear. So in terms of that grant goal, that is a regional grant goal rather than a grant goal for the city itself. So all work for the grant will be dependent on what comes out of the assessments. So it really just depends on what our assessments say in terms of the jobs housing balance, as well as what comes out of the public engagement portion of it.
Okay. Thank you, Erica. And so my next question is for the city attorney. So my concern is that if we take this grant money, that there might be some requirements that we might regret having agreed to, and so I'd kind of like to see actually a comparison table of this is what you have to do if you take their grant money, and this is what you have to do if you decide to self-fund an update to the Heart of the City plan. So my concern is, are there things that we're agreeing to that we might not want and kind of be stuck with? And have you looked at this grant and the requirements in that light?
We did take a look at the grant requirements when this previously came towards council. Thank you, Mayor. The requirements they're largely procedural, and there are significant process requirements in this grant that we would have to comply with. The requirements are not outcome oriented. I would say that I think given some of the goals of the grant that we went through, that there'd be an expectation that the city would take a serious look at particularly additional housing in the area covered by the grant. I don't think there are hard mandates in the requirements, if that's the concern. But I think that it's mostly procedural requirements exclusively, really.
Okay, and through the mayor, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So it did look like there was the affirmatively furthering fair housing element also in this kind of tied into this grant acceptance, and I'm personally concerned about that because that's so far for our housing element proven somewhat ambiguous, and it doesn't seem to have these really easy to understand check boxes.
Okay,
for
let's
us.
not delve into commentary at this point. Let's keep it at questions before we open it to
So are
members of
we, are we going to be looking at the same somewhat ambiguity with this grant for AFFH as we're seeing with the housing element process?
I think that there should be an expectation that there will be significant public process, including outreach and the type of AFFH that we're looking at in the context of the housing element. I don't think it will be the same magnitude as the housing element, just given the different scope of the projects. But I would, this is subjective assessment, but I would say this requires a significant amount of public outreach for a planning change of this scope.
Vice Mayor, do you have questions at this point? Yeah.
So I remember the heart of this, we already have the heart of the city specific plan. So, and then we intend to amend it to consider setback and a few minor things. And so if we only do those minor things that I think the council had put on the work program, what's the estimate of the cost compared with this one, 400,000? It feels like an overhaul of the entire plan. So if we accept that, are we planning to do an overhaul of the plan, which would require significant community engagement? Then what kind of overhaul are we looking for? So I'm confused. What's the goal of this amendment to Heart of the City plan?
Yeah, I'm not sure that is specifically a question for our city attorney's office. Perhaps, our city manager or someone in planning would be more appropriate to speak to that upon an initial impression, but.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually going to look to Ben and his staff on that one.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. City Manager. I can get started and Erica can back me up here. But I think a significant overhaul of the plan will be significantly more expensive than the estimated, than the grant proposal, significantly more. It will be a very major project. I think our thought on this originally is seeing the work program item surfacing a few years ago and wanted to do that part of the work, and perhaps in conjunction with the housing element or not, is what resulted in this particular proposal. But Erica, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that.
Thanks, Ben. No, I think you covered most of it. Thank you.
Okay, and again, this is not time for commentary, just questions at this time. And I do see Vice Mayor, Councilmember Moore has her hand raised as well. But let's do this. Why don't you wrap? If you have another question, ask it. And if Councilmember Moore has another question, go ahead and ask it. Then I'll open it up to members of the public. Vice Mayor, do you have a follow-up question at this time?
So I guess the proposal to MTC has a list of items the staff has in mind, which estimates up to the $400,000. What exactly are those items?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. So those items are specifically outlined in the scope of work, I believe attachment D, and those range from different public engagement efforts to various analysis, such as equity analysis, jobs housing analysis, and the formation of the TAC and CAC, for instance, as well as plan adoption.
How are these related to the work program items the council had?
Sure. So there is some overlap in the sense of looking at for instance, some community assets and services like retail. However, it is a more expanded scope of work than what council was initially thinking of in terms of building setbacks and landscape modifications. So I think that what council was wanting could probably be wrapped up into this, but this grant is definitely a larger scope than the initial work program item from a few years back. So it's we would defer to council to see if this work effort is in line with the priorities.
I'm still fuzzy on exactly what are we amending.
Sure.
Except setback.
Right, exactly. So it is too early, I guess either unfortunately or fortunately, to say exactly what will be amended, because the main purpose of this grant is to really focus on the assessments. So figuring out, in terms of, for instance, mobility or housing, what does this special area have and where is it deficient? And then also what the community and, the CAC and TAC, what can they identify? So I think it'd be premature for staff to identify exact policies or programs or, exact texts to be amended. The main purpose of the goal is really to increase housing, reduce VMT, and bring it more in line with eventually our housing element update and any amendments to our general plan. So unfortunately, it is a bit fuzzy, but that's just because we're not going in with any preconceived notions of what needs to change, because we really are relying on these assessments and the community involvement.
So sounds like a complete overhaul that you don't even know the scope. It could be anything.
I would say that we do know the scope of what work will go into it, but the outcome of what exactly that will look like, that'll really depend, again, on the assessment and the engagement. So hopefully that would reflect the needs of the community.
Okay, thanks very much. And I do see Councilmember Way has a hand raised, and she hasn't spoken yet on this for questions. So let's go to Councilmember Way.
So my question is, it looks like this proposal to execute agreement, but we're not starting to do it until July 2023. So if this agreement is executed, and by July 2023, the council decides we're not going to do it, we can just not take the grant? So is that how the process can be, or do we have to take the grant to make something happen?
Anyone care to answer? Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
Oh, sorry about that. So to clarify, the master funding agreement and as well as the supplement agreement for this particular grant would need to be authorized by the end of the month. However, as noted in both Planning Commission's recommendation and the draft timeline, actual work on this effort would not start until after the housing element update has been certified by HCD. So I believe at that time, if council changes their mind, we would need to talk to MTC to notify them so that they could reallocate the money to a different jurisdiction. But I think it would be helpful to know going into it if council does support this work.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Way. And then Councilmember Moore, did you want to ask a follow-up question before we bring this to members of the public?
Okay. So I appreciate, Erica, that you did mention that this would happen after the housing element was certified, and I think that that's kind of important because we're locating and selecting sites during this housing element, sites that would be within the heart of the city. So I think that's kind of a curious situation because we have the housing element sites are being selected. We were earlier this evening talking about having the bike lanes along Stevens Creek Boulevard funded down to Danza, and then they're going to continue further down. And we also have the Stevens Creek Boulevard transportation study underway, where we just approved funds a couple of months ago for a study all the way to Foothill. So I would want to see all of three of these items kind of be integrated together. So is there some assurance that we have that the transportation study isn't going off in another direction different from this heart of the city plan, that because we don't want to have these projects at odds with one another. So I'm just curious how these are all going to work together.
Right, and that's how we would see it too, is all these different efforts throughout the city and different departments working cohesively within each other to really create a heart of the city that is consistent. So for instance, one of the assessments that we will be looking at is a mobility assessment. So we will be taking that information that our transportation team is working on and incorporating it into Heart of the City to see where it makes sense. So we do really want all efforts to work together.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop this right now with regard to questions because this can kind of go on and on and on. And you know, we're kind of a little bit late right now to be where we're at. So let's go ahead and take this to our members of the public. I have 2 hands raised from the public on the Zoom function. Those are from Lisa Warren and Peggy Griffin. I have 2 blue cards. That's Jennifer Griffin and Jean Bedord. So I'll go ahead and let our members of the public know that you'll need to have your hand raised in the Zoom function or on your phone. That is *9 on your phone, or your blue card in by the time that the first speaker, which will be Lisa Warren, is concluded speaking. And so welcome, Lisa. This is item number 22. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, so the fact that this is been referred to as fuzzy more than once is a red flag to me. I feel like tonight there's been maybe more better questions, different questions that have been asked in the past. So certainly this was not wise to be a consent item, in my opinion. And it seems like the more details that you get, and I feel like the Planning Commission was lacking some of this information that they should have had when they made their decision or recommendation. But there's already been, you know, is this worth $400,000? What the hoops we may have to jump through, the requirements, the constraints, the additional housing right after we've already gotten this. The more I hear about this, the more I think it's a really bad idea to take it at all. And you know, talking about significant outreach being a requirement and community engagement, that is costly to the city. If there has to be more hoops to be jumped through, just like the housing element, that no one's even figured that out, as Councilmember Morris hinted at, I don't know how you can even judge how much it's going to cost to do what you're required to do and whether that outspends the $400,000 you're going to get. It just doesn't seem like a good idea. And I'm guessing that there will be other opportunities in the future when you're really ready for money that may be worth looking at and applying for. I think this is bad. And I think, truthfully, I think that if the Planning Commission had had more information, their recommendation might have been, don't do it. Just because I was at the meeting and I know what they talked about, and that's just my gut feeling. Yeah, and if you're working cohesively within departments, that's harder to do if you have an outside entity telling you, oh, but don't forget you have to do this too, or you're not following your requirements for this money. So I guess that's the simplified version. I could have said it more eloquently perhaps, but I just think I wouldn't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, wait. I have 20 seconds or something. One more thing is, I'm concerned about the vagueness of the future consultant, because there's been a specific consultant discussed prior, and I hope beyond the slides that there's more clarity that.
Thank you, Lisa. Our next speaker is Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Peggy.
Good evening, council and staff. I second everything Lisa Warren has said. I have serious concerns about this. Specifically, in the staff report, it states that they will have asked MTC whether it's allowable to wait until the housing element is certified to even begin. Did they ask, and did they get a direct answer? Also, this is a significant work item, as Vice Mayor Chow brings up, and it will bump other higher priority work items. The initial housing part of the city work item was minor. But this will bump lots of items out because of the deadline. What was initially proposed for the heart of the city update was minor. Once this grant is accepted, how will staff keep from starting this prior to certification? You know, slipped in this little report or that, or it just, I think it will distract from the staff from what their very important priority is of completing the housing element. And it will put undue constraints on what the city wants to do with heart of the city area. So I would ask that you not accept the grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. And I don't see any other hands raised on the Zoom function. Madam City Clerk, are there any more blue cards at this time?
No, Mayor.
No blue cards. Okay, so our public speaker is Jennifer Griffin, followed by Jean Bedord from the public. Jennifer, welcome. Or I should say our live public speaker. So welcome.
Yeah, our Zoom public speaker. Hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin, and this item, to me, it's like the poison apple in what, Sleeping Beauty or Snow White, that the witch gives Snow White. Don't take it, don't bite it. I attended the Planning Commission meeting on this, and, you know, I personally have a lot of time and years involved in Heart of the City, as a lot of other people do, but I am not willing to turn Heart of the City over to ABAG, MTC. I mean, when they start talking about CACs and TACs, we don't need technical advisory committees, and I don't know what a CAC is, a community advisory. We don't need those to tell us about Heart of the City. We're going to have people imported from other cities telling us, you have to dump Heart of the City, you have to cut your ash trees down, you have to put in housing on the sidewalk, 2-story ADUs on the sidewalk. That is what it's all about. People hate our Heart of the City. Not people in Cupertino, but other cities hate it. Evidently, Sacramento hates it too. I'm sorry. We already have the drama of SB 9, the drama of SB 10, ADUs being built in PG&E clearances. We have a bill that's going to have 2-story ADUs. We have a bill that will allow any ADU to be on a front lawn 4 feet from a property line. Every street tree in the city will be cut down. Yes, that's true. There is a bill. We have the hell of the housing element. It is pure hell. It is taking up our time, it's eating up our money, and it's happening to every other city in the state. Nobody said that HCD is going to certify our housing element. I predict HCD will not. It's only certified 2 out of 220 cities. So we are walking into this, and what do they care about job, housing, and balance? Okay, that has nothing to do with Heart of the City. And I'm sorry, I am a woman who cannot ride a bicycle, and I have to drive around parents that are elderly. You can't get me on a bike, and you ain't getting me on a bike. So I really resent the part where they're saying they have to make everyone in the city ride a bike. Get it? I don't ride bikes.
15 seconds.
This is the part where unless we're having a horse and buggy, it's not going down that way. So I don't, I appreciate the staff taking all this time, but don't accept it. It is like the poison apple.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next final speaker is Jean Bedord. Welcome, Jean.
Well, I must say I take a contrary position. My name is Jean Bedord, and I am speaking tonight to urge you to accept this grant of $400,000 from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. You do have an email in your inbox with a number of reasons for approving this grant, including the fact that you really need to appease HCD. Right now you have a target on your back. keep in mind that this is a competitive application. The funds will be happily accepted by another jurisdiction. It is for reimbursable expenses. You are not required. However, let me point out as a resident that $400,000 is a significant amount of money from the general fund. And so you're going to spend probably well over $1 million on this type of work, like it or not. And so the question becomes, whose pocket does it come out of? Does it come out of our city general fund, which we could use for other purposes? Or can we get MTC to pay for part of it, recognizing that they probably didn't take into account all of the expenses that were going to be caused to our city by that, by their requirements? So tonight, I am asking you to be fiscally responsible and accept this grant in time to meet the deadline. It's reimbursable. There are relatively few requirements. As your city attorney has said, it's more procedural. If by some chance you don't spend that much money on revising the specific plan, then you don't apply for the funds. Otherwise, I'd like that money to reimburse the general fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. We'll bring this back to the dais. And Councilmember Moore, did you want to make a comment or bring forth a motion at this time?
Well, I was wondering if perhaps the city attorney could comment on PDF 274 of 632. It says under recommended potential policies and investments, based on any inequities identified in the equity assessment and challenges identified in this housing assessment, create a short list of potential policies for further investigation and potential inclusion in the specific plan. So I'm going to highlight a couple. Under protection, they mention rent stabilization, condominium conversion ordinance, foreclosure mitigation. Under production, they mention having density bonus above state law, elimination of parking minimums, increased density through objective development standards, and then under funding, they mention local sources, for example, finance districts, bonds, impact fees, and commercial development impact fees, et cetera. So when I read this, it makes it sound as though that they're expecting us to provide these policies and funding. Am I understanding that correctly?
So yeah, no, I think that's consistent with my earlier comment, is that there will be an expectation that there's serious consideration of policies, of these type of policies. I think these are not a consideration of every one of these policies, and it's definitely framed in terms of potential consideration. Again, it's framed in procedural terms rather than saying that the city must adopt these policies. And you can contrast that to the housing element process, where there's a menu of policies, but there's an expectation that you adopt some of them to encourage sufficient production of housing. I don't see that kind of mandatory language in this section, but there, as I mentioned earlier, I think there will be an expectation that some subset of these policies get serious consideration by the city. The decision as to whether to pursue specific policy remains in City Council's hands, and I don't see anything, in these criteria in general and in that specific passage that you quoted that would change that.
Also, through the mayor, one issue I do take with this is that this would be one particular strip of the city, this PDA, heart of the city, which would have a set of rules and requirements that the rest of the city would not have to follow. And so I think we need to understand that we would be setting a special set of rules for this one part. And there, when you talk about equity, that's it. It's interesting that this would actually be taking based on any inequities, it would inequitably be making requirements for this PDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. I don't see a motion on the table at this point, so I will go ahead and ask for one in order for us to continue the discussion. Vice Mayor, did you want to bring forward a motion? You don't seem to be willing. Councilmember,
I have a comment.
Okay, Councilmember Way, did you want to bring forward a motion?
Yes, I move we approve the Planning Commission's recommendations.
Okay, and would that be the recommended action listed in the agenda?
Yes, the recommended action
Okay.
per Planning Commission's recommendation.
The Planning Commission recommendations. I think
that's their-
possibly not consistent with
No, I thought that's their recommendation.
the recommended action on our agenda.
Okay.
I think Planning Commission had identified one thing that the staff was recommending against, which I think was to bring it back after the 6th cycle housing, although I'm not sure. Is that, if anybody from staff wants to speak to that, is staff essentially recommending the Planning Commission's recommendations?
I think so.
Okay, no, that was directed at staff, not.
Can staff confirm?
Erica, you have your microphone off, is that correct?
Sure, yes. So staff's recommendation is consistent with planning commissions in terms of timing. However, we are also recommending a little bit more specific, such as the master funding agreement. So we do have 2 recommended actions as stated in the staff report.
Okay, so Councilmember Way, did you want to move
I move the recommended action.
in the agenda? Okay, fair.
Yes.
Will anyone second that motion? I don't see a second for the motion. Well, even for discussion purposes, I'll go ahead and, seeing no second for this motion, then I think that we can, essentially, move on from it unless there is another motion that anyone wants to bring with regard to this item.
I have a comment.
Okay, Vice Mayor, you want to make a comment? Okay, a brief comment since there's no motion to deliberate upon at this time.
So my understanding is, I think I'm going to draw here. We are doing a lot of outreach now for, can I draw?
No, you can't
Is there a
draw.
way? Oh, do I have to share something to draw? Okay. I'll just share a random thing. Okay. So, okay. But ignore the text. I want to understand the scope we are talking about. So we are doing a housing element right now. Wait, how do I?
Let's assume that function's not available, Vice Mayor.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, maybe you
So
can
right
stop-
now we are
or you
doing
can
a
stop
lot
sharing
of
your
outreach. Oh, there.
Or
We
there
are
it
doing
is.
a lot of outreach for housing element. And then we are planning to, for example, consider potential setback and other things that could potentially reduce density. So we have to consider those together with the housing element, because this is when we are upzoning some site, and therefore, if we don't consider those, we might not be able to consider later. So housing element and those heart of the city things that the council has considered to clarify setback where it doesn't exist, and those things in the current part of the city, what we had in mind should be included as a housing element. Now, we were only just going to amend heart of the city for a few things, setback, not a lot. But with this MTC grant, it will require us to do a lot more stuff that we were not planning to do. But then we would be required to do that. To do that, not only the money, we will need a lot of staff time, council time, in order to implement something we didn't plan to do. So yeah, it seems like free money. It's not free. It will cost us a lot of staff time and council time for doing something we are not planning to do. And this little thing that we really want to do should have done together with the housing element this year. So let's just get that integrated with the housing element this year to get it done. That's my point.
Okay, well, thank you for the comment. Councilmember Woolley, did you want to make a brief comment before moving on to the next item?
Yeah, so I kind of struggle when somebody puts money out in front of us. 400,000 sounds like a lot of money. Divide it by 64,000 residents, and you wind up with $6 a piece. So $6 a piece versus incorrect thinking and direction to staff. While we could, direct what our focus should be, or staff's focus should be on updating of the heart of the city, like Vice Mayor said, just these specific items. If staff is looking at this document, for which the city attorney says there's going to be expectations, and city staff feeling that they need to fulfill the expectations, the project grows and looks at things that we didn't intend. So I really struggle. I put money out in front of us. Wow, let's go ahead and take the money. But if it's pushing the wrong message, our community is the one that's ultimately going to be shortchanged. I think first and foremost, we need to be sure that the direction that we're giving staff for updating the heart of the city is truly the will of the community and is not being driven by some expectations. We might be able to override those expectations and say, we took the money, but this is all that you're allowed to do. I'm just not sure that staff works in that mode. They want to feel that they're doing everything that's expected of them. So at this point, I think it's better to make sure that we're the ones driving the boat. Yes, we've got a target on our back, but still, we have a duty to be representing the residents, the community that put us here. That's our duty, and it can't be shortchanged because a bad actor, from everybody's perception pretty much, the bad actor is offering to give us some money, which may move things in the wrong direction. So I think it's better to just go ahead and say thanks, but we need to do this on our own. And we are going to be trying to get as much housing as we possibly can within the community. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I see Councilmember Way with a hand raised. I'm not going to entertain endless discussion at this point because we don't have a motion on the table. So let's go ahead and wrap this. Councilmember Way, if you want to make a very brief comment, we can go ahead.
Actually, I agree with Vice Mayor's comments. This needs to be done with the housing element, and that was our staff's first recommendation, to do it with the housing element, get reimbursed money for $400,000 to me. I do believe that direction is correct because we are doing outreach. We should do outreach. We want to listen to the community. So I'm a little baffled why we're not taking the money and do it with the housing elements and get reimbursed for $400,000. And that was the staff's first recommendation when we heard this last council meeting. So I don't think our attorney says, it's procedural that we're already doing, and the outcome is not controlled by MTC. So I I'm just a little baffled why we're not using that on housing element and get reimbursed, but it's not off this discussion, just my comment.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Councilmember Way. And Vice Mayor, I'm not going to open this back up to, further discussion because, frankly, there's no motion on the table. If you want to put a motion on the table, fine. But otherwise, I would just go ahead and, close this item and then move on to item number 23. You still have your hand raised. A very, very brief comment. This is not an endless discussion on something that's
This
not on the
grant
table.
was approved April 2021. If it was brought to the council at that time, I think it would be different. And right now, this requires technical advisory committee, community advisory committee. Those are things that we're not planning to do and we don't have time to do right now, even when it's combined. And this is just the wrong timing. If it had been a year earlier, that would be great. Also, yeah, so just.
Okay, well, let's go on, and we are at 10:39 right now. Let's reconvene at 10:45, and we'll start with item number 23 when we come back. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're on item number 23, and this is actually an item that I pulled from the agenda from the consent calendar. I just wanted to give a little bit of context to it. I will be attending the United States Conference of Mayors from June 3rd through June 6th. I think it's been a while since Cupertino mayor attended, and so I wanted to give our council an opportunity to communicate through this vehicle with our other mayors from across the country that are attending. They have in this conference the ability to share resolutions. These are non-binding, of course. I mean, there's no legislative authority in the United States Conference of Mayors. It's just a separate nonprofit organization, mainly for the ability to communicate with other jurisdictions across the country. So what they do have, however, is a set of resolutions that they do consider as a group. Again, non-binding. I'll share with you the I'll share with you the last meeting's information, which I'll go ahead and email the link to the city clerk as well. So that's available for people who want to reference it after this meeting. So this is the website for the United States Conference of Mayors, the adopted resolutions from the 89th annual meeting, which was virtual in 2021. And there are various committees that resolutions get assigned to. So you see at the top here, Children, Health, and Human Services, all the way down to Transportation and Communications. And for example, if you wanted to choose energy, for instance, and you conducted a search, it would basically give you the various resolutions. So supporting a clean energy transition by 2035, for instance. You'll see a number of recitals with the whereases and now therefore be it resolved. And so, essentially what I'm suggesting is that our council have until this Friday, or whenever I was indicating it in the recommended action, it would be until, this Friday, April 22nd, to send in proposed resolutions. And I would suggest either City Manager Jim Troop or perhaps Katie Nomura, our Deputy City Manager, to receive those proposed resolutions. And then we could come back at our May 3rd council meeting, once those have been published to the public, for evaluation, just to see what we're looking to set forth. And then perhaps pick and choose among that group. And if there seems to be decent consensus, maybe put that on the consent calendar as well. So that's what I'd like to propose, that we send either to Katie or Jim our proposed resolutions by the end of this week. And Councilmember Moore, you have a question?
Yes. Mayor Paul, could you pull up the 89th, the screen share that you just did? And
Sure.
And if you would just quickly go to the environment tab, and I'm just curious if there's anything on plastics, anything like that in there.
Oh, the environment? I think there was, actually. Give me one second. So, environment, and if it wasn't in the last year's meeting, it might have been in a prior one. Okay. Oh, support plastic pollution reduction. Yes. Yeah. So yes, there was this resolution here, and I think it probably did pass. So just as another point of information, I think they actually also had a little bit more granularity. So you'll note here it says that in 2016 they adopted a rule where if you had a no vote on a specific resolution, that would be also recorded. So there's a link to see who recorded no votes, for the prior meetings, proposed resolutions. So, Councilmember Way, yes.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. I have two questions. The first one is, do we just propose topics, or, because I really don't know how to write a full resolution. Okay,
under this, I would ask that a full resolution be set forth, and even if it's a couple of recitals, and maybe we can wordsmith it a bit.
Okay.
At our meeting.
The second one is, maybe it's more effective if we work with our surrounding cities to have a joint resolution proposed. Would that have more effect, more weight for the,
actually, under this process, and again, this is us going back into this conference after, I think, at least a several-year hiatus. If we go in a little bit earlier in the process, you can get other mayors signing on, or other people attending signing on. We actually have a deadline of May 4th, which is the day after our next council meeting. And so I think, let's kind of, so to speak, get our feet wet, dip our toe back in the water in this process, and then see what happens in future years would be my suggestion. Yes, go ahead.
Do you want us to propose 1, 2, 3? You don't want us to propose a whole bunch of it.
Oh,
right?
actually, I'm not setting a limit, and my expectation was maybe a handful at the most would come in. But if you have, these are basically discussion points, Councilmember Way, and so things that we'd like to set forth as, agreeable to, I think, put in as stated principles in a national conference from our other jurisdictions. One thing I will say is that this group does tend to have some pretty good pull, as you would imagine, on a national level. And so I participated in a Zoom meeting that they had last week with regard to funding for clean energy. And so they actually had key representatives from both the Federal Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy. So I think this is just, a really good opportunity for us to go out there and interface with, people making, federal level decisions, but also, cities from all across the country.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions on this? I don't see hands raised, and so I'll go ahead and ask for any members of the public that would like to speak on the item to raise their hands. I see, okay, I see a blue card from Jennifer Griffin. And so, Jennifer, did you want to speak on this item number 23? And, oh, you were mixing up the numbers? Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Jennifer. And so, Madam City Clerk, did we happen to have any emails that came in with regard to this item number 23?
No, Mayor.
No, okay. So I'll go ahead and entertain a motion, and with everyone's leave, if I just may, just move the recommended action. And would anyone like to second item 23? Councilmember Way? Okay, well, Councilmember Way seconds. Thanks very much. And so I don't see any further hands raised for discussion. Let's vote with our lights.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. And so we're on to public hearings at this point. Item number 24 was postponed until May 3rd at the beginning of our meeting. We will go on to ordinances and action items. Item number 25, the subject is the internal audit, procurement, operational review, final report. And I believe that our presenter is Thomas Leung, our senior management analyst. And so welcome, Thomas. You have the presentation for item 25.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council.
Today,
I'm providing a brief introduction to the item, and then I'll introduce Colleen Wazilis from Moss Adams to give the report. At the end, we'll be available for questions. In fiscal year 2020, the city began an internal audit program and selected Moss Adams as the city's internal auditor through an RFP. In 2021, Moss Adams assessed the city's procurement operations and prepared a report with recommendations and observations. On February 24th, Moss Adams presented the report to the city's audit committee. Comments and requests from the audit committee included: 1, the city should consider reallocating resources before adding any new procurement positions. 2, the city of Campbell should be added to the peer benchmarking in the report. And 3, the city should create an implementation plan, including creating a schedule to track the implementation. What are the next steps for this procurement operational review? Following approval of the report, staff will develop an implementation plan along with schedules to implement the report's recommendations. Staff will regularly report to the audit committee on the implementation status. And the implementation plan and any status reports will be available on the city's website at cupertino.org/budget under internal audit. At this time, I'll introduce Colleen Rosilis, a partner at Moss Adams, to present the procurement operational review.
Thanks, Thomas, and good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Colleen Rosilis. I'm a partner with Moss Adams, and I oversaw this project. I'll give you a brief presentation, and then I'll open it up for any questions and comments you may all have. As you may recall, our first project for the city was an enterprise risk assessment that was presented to all of you in December of 2021. And as a result of that, we conducted an enterprise our number one risk as a result of the enterprise risk assessment was procurement and contract management. And so we conducted this procurement operational review to focus on improving the procurement function, its efficiency and effectiveness, looking at procurement processes, also looking at procurement principles, so things like equity, ethics, fair competition, quality, and sustainability. We wanted to look at how procurement at the city aligned with the city's goals, its policies, and your plans, as well as best practices in public procurement, what was happening in leading cities, and laws and regulations. Overall, we found that the city was performing well in terms of procurement, with some pretty significant opportunities for improvement in how procurement is structured and processes, particularly in terms of documenting those processes and communicating those out to staff as a result of the city's procurement model. The success of the city's procurement model is really hinging on some very significantly dedicated staff, really some very careful collaborative efforts among city staff, particularly in finance, who work hard to make sure that the current procurement processes work for the city, and that staff communicate as much as they do. Our primary recommendation and finding here is that the city operates under a highly decentralized model with pretty limited centralized oversight of procurement. That is a very common model in smaller cities with less complex operations. As Cupertino has grown and gotten more complex, that's also gotten more complex and challenging for the city. And that has pretty significantly increased the risks for the city. It's also impacted the city's ability to do some things like have oversight in terms of making sure that we can control standardized procurement processes, making sure that we can have enhanced cooperation between city departments, that we can reduce duplicate purchases, that we can have shared specialized knowledge among procurement staff, particularly for really complex purchases and contract management, change orders, things like that, and also taking advantage of economies of scale and cooperative purchasing with other agencies that ultimately saves the city money. So we would recommend that the city does look at a different procurement model, some increased level of centralization, more centralized oversight that can help the city to leverage its purchasing power and maximize value, reduce risks, and increase controls. We'd like the city to take a look at other models of staffing, other models of procurement governance, and also other models of technology to just make sure that we can be as efficient, as effective as possible in terms of delivering procurement services across the city. After we've evaluated the current model, then there are a number of other recommendations that we have that includes streamlining processes and clarifying policies and procedures, roles and responsibilities, ensuring those policies and procedures are updated and that staff are regularly trained on them, that self-service training is available. Those are really important because if we don't have those policies and procedures updated, we can't hold staff accountable to them. And that they're aligned with city's priorities and values. So for example, procurement is an area where council members often have a really high level of interest in terms of aligning procurement with values, with our priorities. So things like we might want to have local government incentives for buying local. We might want to have incentives for small businesses in the community to be able to do business. But we also want to make sure that our procurement laws and processes align with that. And so those are things that we want to make sure that are updated on a regular basis and that we have that oversight. Same thing with procurement thresholds. And then finally, within our recommendations, to mitigate risk, and when we have a really highly decentralized process, we've got individuals in departments who don't have any backup. We have quite a few people who wear a lot of hats who've been doing procurement for a long time. And we want to make sure that we're cross-training staff, we're identifying backups so that we are making sure that we have those appropriate controls and that we're also being as effective as possible in terms of mitigating that risk of having just one person who has all of that intellectual knowledge and institutional knowledge for procurement across the city. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and let you all ask questions.
Thank you very much, Colleen, and good to talk to you again. We had a great conversation a few weeks ago. And so let me go ahead and ask our members of the public if there's anybody that would like to make a comment on this presentation at this time. So I don't see any members of the public with their hands raised. Oh, Peggy Griffin. Peggy Griffin has a hand raised in the Zoom function. And same with any members of the public that are live here. If you want to speak on this item number 25, please fill out a blue card by the time that Peggy is done speaking. And then also, if you're just over email, please email cityclerk@cupertino.org by the time Peggy is done speaking to be heard on this item. Welcome, Peggy.
Good evening, council and staff, and thank you for the presentation. I had some questions. Once, I apologize that I haven't read the report in detail, but you mentioned like changes in examples of recommendations, and one was change in structure. Are there examples of suggested structure, or where does the city go from here after this report is accepted? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peggy. I don't see any further hands raised on Zoom or blue cards. And Madam City Clerk, were there any emails that came in on this item?
No, Mayor.
Okay, great. So let's go back to the dais. I will ask that we bring in a motion for further discussion. It's fairly straightforward. The recommended action is consider accepting the procurement operational review final report. And so would anyone like to move that in the form of moving to accept the procurement operational review?
Excuse me, Mayor Paul.
Yes,
may
Councilmember
I
Moore.
ask some questions?
Oh, before we go to a motion, sure. Let's go ahead and ask questions of either staff or our outside consultant from Moss Adams. Councilmember Moore.
Okay, thank you. Kirsten, I do believe I did send an email regarding this item. I hope I got the number correct on it regarding item 25. It had 3 attachments, and I just sent it. So I'm curious. There were some comparisons with some other cities at the end of this report, and I would like to. If it could be summarized what the difference is, I would appreciate that. And I'll just start with that question, and then I have a couple of other questions, and hopefully that the email I sent in gets into the public record.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Councilmember Moore. I think this is probably a question for Colleen, and I think you're probably referring to Appendix D of the report, where it references pure benchmarking, and it looks like the cities were Sunnyvale, Milpitas, Los Altos, and Gilroy. Colleen, did you want to speak to this in terms of the question from Councilmember Moore?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we did do peer benchmarking. We worked with the city to identify peers, and then we added Campbell after the audit committee meeting at the request of Councilmember Moore. So the results of this benchmarking showed that, essentially cities that are larger than you tend to have a centralized or hybrid procurement model. Cities that are smaller than you tend to be decentralized. We collected demographic information and some budget information to show how big they are and information on the level of purchasing that these cities did. We also gathered information from the cities based on their purchasing thresholds and authority. This was to provide the city with just some additional information as they're considering what the level of staffing might look like if they were to gather purchasing FTEs in a centralized or hybrid environment, as well as what those policies and other thresholds looked like in other cities. So it informed our analysis in terms of what the model that we recommended in terms of moving towards centralized or hybrid. And we just wanted to present you with the most information that we had.
Okay, thanks, Colleen. Councilmember Moore, did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, thank you. So I don't know if this was within your report, but I was wondering if you have a recommendation that all contracts must be in writing, because we do have, and that was what was in the attachments which I sent to the city, was an indication that we have some verbal contracts, and so that's the first item that I have question about. Are you recommending that there's a requirement that we have contracts always in writing, or is that not an area that leaves us open to fraud, waste, and abuse?
So it would be my recommendation, certainly our recommendation, if you're going through your procurement policies and procedures, to make sure that language is buttoned up so that your contracts are in writing, yes.
May I continue, Mayor Paul?
With questions, Councilmember Moore, or did you have?
Yes.
Okay.
So the next one is I found a contract example which didn't exactly have a nexus with council direction, and what I mean by that is that a staff member had a contract drawn up, and within the contract it actually had a paragraph stating that they would go to city council to have approval of the project that they were working on, and then continue on. And it kind of looked like it was missing the council direction element. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Without seeing it in front of me, without knowing what the threshold is, whether it was above or below your approval threshold, I can't say for sure. What we do want to see is that your policies and procedures are in alignment, that everyone is well trained on them, that everyone has regular refresher training and is well aware. That's one of the risks in a highly decentralized environment. We do know that we heard from staff that we have, old policies are really easy to be passed around in this environment when we don't have one person or, kind of centralized oversight. And so I would say that, it's not uncommon that things can slip through the cracks in that regard. And so we want to make sure that those things are buttoned up. And that's why internal controls exist.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if you're going to be getting into the credit cards in your audit coming in the future to look at the credit card policy. Is that something that's in the works?
We certainly can program that into future audit plans, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Moore and Colleen. And Colleen, with regard to the decentralized versus centralized versus hybrid, would you say that the centralized system is easier to audit?
I think it would be easier to audit. It depends on what your records are like. So that's probably the number one thing, is whether your records are kept in good shape. So that's the technology and the systems that you use. That's important. And then probably, in terms of ease of audit, then it's communication and collaboration with you all, which your staff did have very good communication and collaboration. So I would think that, from an audit and testing perspective, that part's great.
Great. And in our conversation, I wanted to share this with the public. You had mentioned a procurement officer, which is a position that could be really very useful in terms of trying to get a more objective opinion, I guess, from the perspective of the public for something like construction contracts. Can you elaborate a bit on that particular topic?
Yeah, so many public agencies have procurement officers. There are certifications, there are public associations for procurement officers. It absolutely is a profession and a body that is specialized knowledge. And so for things like negotiating construction contracts, making sure that the city is getting the best deals, right? When we think, for example, of all of the money that's coming in through federal and state infrastructure dollars and being prepared from both a capital programming and a procurement perspective to actually be able to spend those dollars, we've got to have the mechanisms and the staffing and the capacity in place to be able to do that. And so someone who has the expertise to really be able to execute on those contracts will make sure that we don't let those funds pass us by.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colleen. And then my final question, let me follow up on the inquiry from the member of the public who asked, what are our next steps here? And, realizing within the staff report there is, kind of an identification of no fiscal impact, but of course, the report that we're looking to approve or being asked to approve tonight actually has quite a few far-ranging follow-up items that would, take time and money, frankly. And so when you look at it from the perspective of the entity generating the report, what do you see as perhaps the next 2 or 3 major steps that we're looking at as a jurisdiction, so that we have a kind of a clear direction going forward if we approve this as a final report this evening?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what our clients typically do is City Council accepts our report and directs staff to develop an implementation plan. And we have 10 recommendations in our report. Our primary recommendation is to evaluate the staffing model and the city's entire model for procurement, and to consider looking at a framework that looks at a more centralized or hybrid approach. So that would be taking an assessment of whether you want to add an FTE or whether you want to assess based on staff that are in departments. Most of them are partially dedicated to procurement, whether you can take partial FTEs from departments and cobble together staff so that you can identify those centralized capacity. We've seen that done both ways. So I would do that step first. That would be the number one priority, and that is our primary recommendation. The next step I would say would be to take a look at those policies and procedures, because once you are centralizing, you are going to change your processes. And so looking at those policies and procedures and those roles and responsibilities, those are the next 2 things that I would do. And that'll probably keep that procurement officer and your administrative services team busy for the next 12 to 18 months working on those things. And then I would come back and I would do some internal controls testing of procurement.
That sounds great. Well, thank you very much, Colleen, and thank you very much for keeping that direct channel of communication open. Would you recommend that, in fact, that direct channel of communication stay open between, I guess particularly the subcommittee members from the City Council and yourself or your colleagues at Moss Adams as the external auditor?
Yeah, yes, and that absolutely is internal audit's role. We're here for City Council and we're certainly available, yes.
Okay, great, thanks very much. And at this point, I do see a new hand raised from Councilmember Way, so Councilmember Way.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. So I have 2 questions. So I'm glad you asked the procedures, and so I understand the next steps is to do what to do. I'm particularly interested in page 501 because I'm a city council, so it mentions the city council. It seems to be that procurement roles and responsibilities are not clearly understood among city staff and the council, which can hinder organizational effectiveness. So the whole next paragraph concerns me and my fellow council members. So my question for you is, I don't think I need to read it, that next paragraph, but it seems that, I'll read the last paragraph. Maybe I have to start from in the middle. Okay, I'll be really fast. Okay. The council has shown elevated interest in city operational matters and technical activities and has engaged in detailed level work such as reviewing credit card statements. This practice is not the best use of council time, and the insertion of council into day-to-day matters can perpetuate a sense of doubt among city staff, hindering operational efficiency. Such an environment weakens the authority and expertise of city leadership to develop and implement strategic updates to procurement practice. The following table identifies high-level distinctions between the roles of the city council and city staff. So there's a table of city council and city staff to-do and not to-do list. My question for you is, in the following steps, after the procurement procedures has been identified and maybe we could hire extra staff, will there be training for both city council and city staff on our roles and responsibilities so that this new procurement procedure and staff or the teamwork can move forward under expertise of city leadership and to develop that strategic update? So my question is there a follow-up on training for both city council and staff?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea and an excellent suggestion. And when we think about updating policies and procedures and your very important role in terms of setting policy and strategy for the city, setting policy and strategy for what we do, purchase, who we engage with, who our vendors and contractors are, that's a very important role. And so you should definitely be updated as the policies are updated, as roles and responsibilities change, making sure that they align with your vision and direction for the city, your strategic goals for the city, and absolutely making sure that new council members, as they come on board, fully understand that you're provided regular refreshers. That's definitely a governance best practice.
Great. Thank you very much, Councilmember Way. And Colleen, is there anything that prohibits us in these guidelines from examining things like credit card statements and seeing the various details of how things are being spent in the city?
No, you're absolutely not prohibited. From our perspective, what we want is for people to be operating at their highest and best use. And what we see across the city is that lots of folks, council management on down, are pulled down into the weeds a lot and pulled down into operational duties and not necessarily up at their highest and best use, not working at that policy and strategy level. People wear a lot of hats in the city. People do a lot of the day-to-day work when they could be doing a lot of higher level work. And part of that is because of just high workloads. Another piece is that we're not as efficient as we could be. And this is one of those processes that could be a lot more efficient and have people working in the places where they are most effective. And when the process is more effective, then we can build that trust where you don't necessarily maybe need to feel like you need to do those spot checks so often when you have those appropriate controls in place, right?
I hear what you're saying, Colleen, and it's greatly appreciated in terms of adding a bit more context and parameters to the efforts there. Let me read the preface since Councilmember Wade did start mid-sentence in there. The beginning of that sentence reads, however, due in part to an embezzlement that occurred from 2000 to 2014 and was discovered in 2018, the council has shown elevated levels of interest in city operational matters. And so, with regard to credit card usage, Colleen, what I would ask you is if we're pointing out, and I was actually pointing this out a couple of years ago, 4 years ago now, with regard to the usage of credit cards. I wasn't going through, each of the purchases, but at the time I was wondering, okay, is this the best way to make sure that we have public safety and the spending, and I was told from multiple sources that credit card usage is, something that you have to be really careful about. And I know that it did curtail for a bit, but one of the things that we've noticed over time is that usage has actually increased quite a bit. And so when we talk about things like the quote, engage in detail level work, such as reviewing credit card statements, I mean, I think what we've noticed recently, once that detailed work has occurred, is that usage of credit cards has actually gone back down. And so, instead of this kind of push-pull that gets into the conversation between, well, don't get into our business and we won't, bring this up in, like other contexts, what would you kind of suggest as, kind of maybe a more effective long-term, way of addressing this? Because there are certainly areas that can be improved in any system. And I think that there are tendencies, if you will, irrespective of, trying to create a dichotomy between, so-called policy and so-called implementation of that policy. So in this particular example, just so that we can kind of guide our actions in the future more specifically, rather than having to kind of come back to this in a couple of years. And of course, the door opens for opportunists to go ahead and say, well, look, let's take this clause out of context and point our fingers at you. So you just, if the goal is really to try to improve the system, what would you recommend in this particular context? That we go either on the specific or the principled higher level, order in terms of how our mindset or operating practices should proceed?
Well, with respect to credit cards, it absolutely is understandable that you're in the situation that you are in, and it absolutely does take time to rebuild trust and confidence. And that's part of why we're here. Right? That's part of why you have an internal audit function. So establishing that and establishing a program that you have confidence in, I think, is part of it. We did review credit card policy. We talked to all of our interviewees about credit cards. We reviewed usage as part of this. We didn't find anything that was not standard. It's kind of like, I hate to use this metaphor, but if an airplane crashes, right, that airline's probably the safest one to fly for a while. And so we found, very much standard practice, best practice in terms of Cal cards in place at the city, which is why you didn't find any findings or recommendations really related specifically to credit cards in this review. What I would recommend is doing, regular internal controls testing and testing of credit cards across the city within our internal audit program, which we absolutely can build into next year's program. And if it's something that you have a high level of interest in, we can do at a higher frequency.
Okay, fair enough. And so let me take this back to council. If there are any other follow-up questions at this point, we'll go ahead and have some. But if we can briefly wrap those up and then set a motion forward for further discussion. And again, this is fairly simple with regard to the requested action, which is to accept the final report. Councilmember Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Paul. I was just wondering if you could kind of refresh our memories, but I think with regards to the credit cards, I think there was a situation in the fall where an individual had used the credit card for personal item purchase, some items, if you remember that, and what happened from that situation.
I think that's really more of a question for staff. That was something that was handled internally with our then interim city manager, but perhaps Jim, you're aware of that and could share to the extent that you can.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, that was part of the controls. We did find that there had been a purchase that shouldn't have been purchased, and that was found through the process of checking and having the backup. Having the people in the different departments request that, like let's say it's a management analyst who's working on putting together the credit cards, asking for that backup, it wasn't there, so that was the first piece, like, okay, where is it? And then the process continued till we found out that, yes, there had been a small issue with the credit card that was been corrected.
Right. Okay, anything else, Councilmember Moore or Vice Mayor, you have your hand raised?
Well, I'm curious what, with regards to policy, are we going to be working on for the next steps? And I do see some issues with regards to Cal cards in this document. So since we are supposed to be creating, reviewing, and adopting strategic policy, I'm going to assume that would cover like my request that all contracts be in writing, that if we're going to have invoices paid, if we're going to have payments to an organization, that we actually have an invoice which explains what that was for. Because some of these, from the public records requests that I did, I found $218,000 have been paid without having associated invoices, and that to me is a policy problem that needs to be fixed. So are we going to expect that staff is going to come back with some policy recommendations? Is that in the offing for our next steps?
Well, that's a fair question, Councilmember Moore. And Jim, I do see that you have made eye contact. Did you want to address that? Because I was going to suggest that since we do have an audit subcommittee identified in council, that perhaps as part of the motion, we can ask them to go forward and work with staff as well as Colleen and Moss Adams to help identify particular items of immediate follow-up based upon an assumed final acceptance of this report. So, Jim, did you have anything to add to that suggestion? Okay, great. Councilmember Moore, anything else? Vice Mayor Chow, did you have a question before we set a motion in place?
So I have not looked at the credit card statements, but I really appreciate council members who do take the time to look at that. So my understanding is the recommendation is if we have internal control in place, then there is less need for a council member to look at those statements. But right now there isn't such control. Therefore, some council members are spending time trying to find out where there might be potential problems so we can add control. Like some of the things that we find out, Councilmember Moore found out about some of these payments without invoice, and or we staff don't even know what they are, what function a particular organization is performing for that. These are very important. Yeah, maybe it's in the weeds, but I think these are part of the process, and I'm really glad that we are doing this exercise, and we will have an improvement so that in the future, controls are in place, then we don't have to go into the weeds. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I don't think I could have said it better myself. And the one thing that I'll add to that is that, as this process goes along, and, Moss Adams is obviously a very reputable auditor, and, we have been designated, I think, very capable point person at this point. As this process goes along, we'll have more communication with the auditor. Will have more interface with our staff members in terms of being able to deliver what's happening here. I will point out that this was council itself that set this audit into place, and so without casting aspersions, I will say that it is nice to be able to have colleagues that engage more directly and get into more of those details. Because the truth of the matter is this: Democratic representative politics, when you have really very well funded special interests in there, at the end of the day, they don't really want you to get into the weeds. At the end of the day, it's kind of like, okay, you don't really have to do any work at all. Just vote the way that we tell you to. And so, from my perspective, I feel like, why are we doing this as a system if that's basically the attitude that a lot of people take? So, I'm very grateful. I know it's extra work, but really that's kind of the point of our system, which is to allow us to get into those weeds and get those, basic and more specific understandings. So I'm happy to move this item. And Councilmember Wei, you have your hand raised. Did you have a kind of a final? Okay, sure. Well, do you mind if I make the motion? So I'm happy to move this item as recommended with the modification that I had discussed previously, that we ask the audit committee members of the council to go forward and work with our staff and the external auditor to bring forth a list of immediate next steps following this final report. And Council Member Moore, you have your hand raised. Did you? I'm sorry. Did you? Oh, you wanted to second it. Did you want to second it, Councilmember Moore? Or? Oh, you did? Do you? Okay. Well,
second that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. Well, Councilmember Way seconded, and I think you had a comment. Although Councilmember Moore did want to second it, but no, it's up to you if you're okay with it. Okay, Councilmember Moore, did you still want to second the motion that was set forth?
Second.
Okay, great. Councilmember Way, you have the first comment off the motion.
Yes, I'm very glad that we are starting this process, and I do believe that's going to once we have that procedure and staff put in place, we can build trust, and really we can do less internal work, but we still should be on top of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
Absolutely.
I do want to say that I do believe we have, I don't think our staff right now doesn't have any process, else they wouldn't have found about that credit card personal purchase. So I do think we have that process. Maybe it's not perfect, it needs to be refined, and I do think we're doing a good job of having our outside editor, internal editor to work on it, and we have great city council members to work on it. But I do want to say I think our staff has worked very hard, and they do have certain procedures. That's why they found out that personal expense. So I want to be fair to the staff. Like, it's not like they don't have any internal check.
Right, absolutely. And any system can be improved at every point in the way. Vice Mayor Chow.
Yeah, definitely. I think the staff is already doing everything they could to follow the current rule. But then there are sometimes gaps in the rule that's unintended, and then we are trying to just improve the system. And I'm guilty that I didn't read the entire report, and so there are 10 recommendations. I'm curious whether the audit committee members, do you agree with all 10 of the recommendations, or there are some that you feel there might be some things that you think could be done differently?
Well, Vice Mayor Chow, what I would say is that I'm glad that we have the motion on the table that we do, so that we're not basically giving an open-ended instruction by way of failing to give any kind of instruction in terms of how we proceed in the next step. Because I think that's how you end up getting a lot of the verbiage that you see in some of these, reports, because we do authorize something and then ultimately we no longer have any stewardship over the process. And so what I will say is that I don't think we're going to prioritize every single one of those 10 recommendations as an immediate next step, but at least we have a couple of our public representatives working on trying to get those prioritizations back to council and report back as to what it is that we would recommend moving forward. So at this time, I'll be honest with you, I'm not prepared to tell you out of those 10 which ones I would go in what order, but I do think that it is important for us to have fairly immediate follow-up in terms of having those conversations with our staff and the external auditor.
What I meant is that not really order, it's just, is there some that you might disagree with that I should take a look more further?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because everyone has different opinions. Sometimes a person sees things differently, but maybe you as council members might disagree with some of the recommendations, then I can take a further look at some of them.
Yeah, I could give you a top level, sense of the world. From my experience, I think having a procurement officer would be a really nice thing, because I'll be frank, if something is a little bit more acceptable, to people that want to do it, it might seem a little bit less expensive, and if it's less acceptable, it might seem more expensive. So really, for me, I'm kind of like, well, it would be nice to have someone whose dedicated job is to make sure that they're evaluating this from a neutral perspective. So I mean, I would actually put that fairly high on my list, but at the same time, I'm not really prepared to say, what else would be really high and what would be a lower priority. I mean, I think systemically, when you're talking about the way procurement is done from a top level perspective, I'd have to get a little bit more detail about what that would entail in terms of, you know, the way that we move towards greater centralization in our procurement. So, you know, that's by way of my answer. If Councilman Moore, you're the other member of the audit committee, did you want to speak to that?
Okay, so there wasn't anything in the list that I would say no to in particular. I might, if it's supposed to be viewed as a prioritized list, I would move item 7, which is regarding policy, up higher perhaps. And then there is a nice amount of flexibility within each of these recommendations as well. So there's, I don't feel like we're being cornered into a specific course of action. And one of them in particular is like with regards to having our policy essentially dovetail into our beliefs, if you will. For instance, if we want to have the single-use plastic ordinance, then when we have an event for the public where we're providing water, how are we going to be, what kind of cups will the public have? How disposable are they? And do we ever allow water bottles throughout the city for events, or are we going to use some other means to provide hydration, those kinds of things. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and I particularly like the idea of saving money by centralizing this, and I think the subcommittee can go through here and come up with a prioritized list, and within the flexibility that we have, make some recommendations based on that.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Councilmember Moore. And again, we do have the motion on the table. Any other comments or follow-ups at this time? All right, great. Let's vote with our lights.
The motion carries unanimously.
Here's what I recommend at this point. We actually have 2 more items on our agenda tonight at this point. One of them is a work plan. The other one is the adjustments to the Teen Commission. I think the Teen Commission item is achievable. Let me check in. Initially, I had said that we want to be able to reserve the Thursdays of the weeks of council. And I know that we were trying to, try to cut back a little bit on the meeting schedules and keep it on regular agendas. But let me see if there's an appetite for having a special meeting this Thursday or a continuation of this one for item number 27. Let me first check in with our city manager. So Jim, is that something that we could, potentially entertain for this Thursday?
Yeah, that's something I'd rather not, but this is important. But I'd like to throw out an idea that the work plan, the rankings, we've done them twice now. This one really was sort of another time where we had the same presentation, same PowerPoint. It was going to be the opportunity for council to rank them again here. Mm-hmm. But if we want, we can say, take that home, send it back into us, say, by Thursday, and then we'll have that all ready to go, because this was going to be like the final ranking at that point in time until we come back during the budget cycle again. So I don't know if that would help, where it would have been, like I said, the same presentation, but when we get to the part with the projects, they were now ranked in the new orders. And with Katie, she has it set up where, you have the new Excel spreadsheet, you can re-rank it at that point, and then we'd have it done if you wanted to do it that way.
Okay, well, let's see what the pleasure of council is. I'd be willing to, I see a head shaking down the dais. So would anyone like to?
I'd rather have it on next Tuesday, because
Okay.
all the Tuesdays for council meetings.
Okay, so Councilmember Way, you'd prefer next Tuesday, and I think I'm not available next Tuesday. There's an FUHSD ceremony that they wanted me to appear at, so that's kind of a long-standing.
Mayor Paul,
Yeah.
Mayor Paul, it's
They took that off calendar. Councilman Moore, or that I think we were about to do that. Councilman Moore.
I don't have an issue with Thursday. I think that would be great, actually, to continue this, the work plan item. It's the rating sheet, because there's some clarification that I still need with these items, so that I don't throw numbers at two things which are pretty equivalent.
Okay, well, it sounds like continuation to Thursday. How are schedules looking? Councilmember Way, you have
Okay, so can you make it, it's just one item, right?
it is just one item, yes.
Later, like 9.
9 o'clock? Oh, my goodness.
12, that's enough.
I think that's,
I won't be back home until 8,
okay.
8:30.
Okay, so 9 o'clock, would that work for schedules here in terms of, it actually does push it up a little bit earlier than it would have appeared this evening anyway. 9 o'clock on Thursday, would that work to,
John, I think he
Councilmember
really
Willie?
doesn't like it overnight.
Non-council night.
He doesn't like it.
It gets quite challenging, I understand.
Mayor Paul, is there any chance that tomorrow night would work?
What about tomorrow? I think I actually have meetings tomorrow night.
Where,
check.
Wednesday.
Mayor,
Yes, Jim.
I was going to say, or if Councilmember Moore has questions, we could meet with her separately if that might answer anything. I'm just trying to think of different ways.
I actually am available tomorrow, in addition to.
Tomorrow is okay. And by the way, Tuesday is planning commission meeting, so the council chamber won't be available usually unless it's the 5th Tuesday.
I think next
Yeah.
week might be a,
That's
that should be planning
planning
commission.
meeting, yeah.
But they might not be
So
live. They
Tomorrow
might
night is okay for me.
Ca-
John?
Okay,
I would take tomorrow,
6:45?
yeah,
Oh,
at
yeah.
6:45 over, I'm not starting at 9 o'clock.
8? I mean, I can come back a little earlier, but
is that tomorrow or Thursday? Tomorrow,
I can come back a little earlier, but I already have a commitment, so I can't be back 6:45, sorry.
okay.
But 8 o'clock, I can try to just come straight here. Is that okay?
So I won't be available tomorrow.
Next Monday?
Well, let's explore this possibility if you have questions, referring them to staff without creating a group communication here. Okay. So is that something that we can do, just to refer those questions individually to staff to get to the point where we can, although we would need a consolidated understanding of what that, information would be. So, okay, let's think this through. We're on April 19th, and then May 3rd is our next meeting. If we were to put this, I think we need to cover this before our May 3rd meeting, just in order to, proceed with, the ramifications off of the prioritized work plan items.
Mayor Paul?
Yes, Councilmember Moore.
Is there any possibility that the 22nd, this Friday, or the 26th, Tuesday, or the 27th, Wednesday, would work?
Well,
Oh, no, we're saying no to Tuesday, so next
Yes.
Wednesday, so Friday or next Wednesday.
No Monday? Why?
Yeah. For my
On Monday, I've got the CEP at 11, and then and then the audit committee at 4. You're not going to have too much brain power coming from me after that.
You have a lot of work.
I'm saying
No, that's too
Friday
much.
I'll be driving my wife to the airport that night.
So Friday, okay, so none of those days seem to work.
Next Wednesday does not work? Next Wednesday,
Well,
the 27th?
Let's do this. Councilmember Way, I'm very apologetic about tomorrow, but it sounds like that's the one that would, and actually, Chris, did you say that tomorrow isn't going to work for you?
I am not available tomorrow.
You're not available tomorrow, okay. And
How about the
So-
assistant city attorney in place of Chris?
we could see if Michael's available. Is that for a meeting tomorrow evening?
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, you can't make it? Okay. Well, I think that at this, Friday? Well,
I'll
our
be
city
fine.
manager is not
No,
available
I'm
on Friday evening.
Okay.
So I have a question. I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, please, go ahead,
On
Councilmember.
Tuesday, the 26th, you have something How long does that last?
I have a FUHSD commitment where I don't need to stay at the entire, board meeting, but I will be there at the beginning of it.
Maybe if you come back, we can have a meeting?
For next Tuesday, I'm not
Right.
exactly sure when they will be holding the item. That's the problem.
I have here, next Tuesday is bike ped commission interview.
Well, that's
Why is
another
that?
issue, actually.
I thought you said it's postponed.
Yeah, we're going to need to postpone that one with regard to getting, that never made it on my calendar. And, unfortunately, I have a longstanding commitment to attend the FUHSD meeting. So I would say that if next Tuesday, we would probably also need to start it at 8 o'clock.
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
That's planning commission meeting, so where do we meet?
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
I do see we have 6 PM city council already penciled in on the 28th for a closed session. Is there a possibility that it's going to be brief and then we can?
I don't think so. That's closed session litigation, so that's usually not something that gets, concluded in a really, I would allocate at least an hour and a half or 2 hours for that, so. Well, I think we're back to Thursday of this week, frankly, and, Councilmember Way, you had mentioned 9 o'clock.
Is it
Can we-
possible to meet earlier, like 5 to 7?
When is your commitment, Councilmember Way?
It's usually until 8, but I could get off at 7.
But it starts at what time?
It starts at 1.
Oh, 1, okay, so it's a fairly early commitment. Okay, then, what about, can we go into the morning on Thursday then?
Is that not good to our public?
Yeah, okay, the workday, okay. Then, Councilmember Way, you said 8 o'clock is the earliest that you can make it? All right, let's make it 8 o'clock then, Thursday, and that would be on the 21st. We'll continue item number 27. And then for item number 29, let's, Kirsten, do you have no, actually, it's item number 28. Let me take a motion to continue item number 27 until 8 o'clock this Thursday. I'll make that motion. Can I have a second for that?
Wait, did Councilmember Wei said 7 is okay?
I said 8 o'clock.
So you can push it to 7. I know John really wants the meeting to end at 9 on non-council days.
There's 60 minutes allocated for this under our original, program, so,
So we try to finish in 1 hour, okay.
well, within 2 hours anyway.
We can send out ratings in the first, so we already have it.
Well, you have the material now, so you can, take the hard copy and, evaluate it. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you. Mayor Paul, I'm a little concerned that given the time that we maybe can't get through the teen commission staggered term item quickly enough.
That's
but,
fine. Well, let's deal with this item first, though.
Okay, I'm just wondering if we want to continue both of them, is my
Okay.
question.
Well, now that we've, spent the time on this, do you want to continue both until Thursday, or should we move to send the teen commission item to May 3rd?
I think
Any-
let's just do teen commission. We already are very short on time for Thursday, yeah.
Okay, well, let's move this item, let's move item 27 and continue it until Thursday at 8 PM, April 21st.
So should we maybe submit a straw vote so that we have something, but we might be changing that during the meeting?
I wouldn't recommend that.
No?
I don't recommend.
To save us time.
Well, I don't think that'll save time.
Okay.
There are too many logistics. And there's only one working day between now and then, so.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay, I don't see any members of the public with a hand raised on this item. Let's go ahead and take a vote with our lights on this.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you, Madam City Clerk. And Madam City Clerk, if you could, I know you had estimated 4 minutes for your presentation on item 28. Could you present item 28, please? If you could,
Certainly.
yeah.
Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. So, so staff is looking for guidance on correcting the teen commission term schedules in order to move forward with the annual recruitment process. As previously noted, the code specifies that the commission's appointments should be made in 5 appointments should be made in odd numbered years, and 4 appointments in even numbered years, as shown in this photo. It became off balance in 2011 to where 5 members were appointed to 2-year terms, and council chose not to include a 1-year term as necessary. So that resulted in 6 vacancies for the following appointment cycle. That's where we are now. We have 3 terms expiring in this even year, where the code specifies that there should be 4 terms expiring. So we have a couple of options that we were recommending, one of which would be to retroactively limit the term of a current teen commissioner to 1 year, expiring on August 31st, 2022, instead of August 31st, 2023. I did, upon council's direction, I did check with the commission at their last meeting, and no teen commission members have accepted. And then the second option would be to amend the code, direct staff to amend the municipal code to match our current appointment terms of 6 appointments in odd numbered years and 3 appointments in even numbered years, and then authorize staff to proceed with the annual recruitment. The deadline for the May interviews is no longer recommended. It's not viable to properly notice and interview. So we're recommending August, application deadline of 4:30 p.m. on July 29th, and interview dates occurring at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, August 8th, and Tuesday, August 9th. And so there were a couple of options that were suggested at the last meeting, but they actually do not comply with the code, so staff is not recommending either of those options. So we're just looking for directions from council.
Oh, okay. John has a hand raised.
Maybe Kirsten could put back that calendar, if you will, with the couple rows, and it said 6 and 3. I think that helps clarify. And the option that I would toss out is that we're currently in an even year in the 3. I would say that we choose 4, and 1 is non-voting for 12 months. And at the expiration of the next one, that one that we now chose as the 4th one is now a voting member, and it puts us on the correct track.
Okay. Councilmember Chow, Vice Mayor Chow.
So we are not complying with the code anyway right now.
That's correct.
So whatever we do, you need to amend the code. You are just recommending amending the code to make that 6-3. Then it doesn't make sense. I agree with Councilmember Whaley that we should appoint 4, but we will just have 1 extra voting member this year. We are not complying anyway. It doesn't matter how not comply. So we'll just have 10 members rather than 9 this year. So what? It doesn't comply anyway. And then next year will be fine.
I think you don't want a even number voting, because then it can be
Microphone.
Then you could be a 5-5.
Mm,
You need an odd number, and that's why 12 months of non-voting for one of the members.
I think for team commission, that probably is not such a big issue, and maybe we can say the staff would be the tiebreaker for this year.
Okay, let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and ask any members of the public if they have any comments here. And I'll take a raised hand if anyone cares to speak, as well as any blue cards at this time. Are there any emails, Madam City Clerk, on this item?
No, Mayor.
Okay, so having no members of the public, either on Zoom or on the phone, or here live or over email, let's go ahead and bring this back to council. I didn't hear any questions. It's fairly clear that the question is, how do we bring this back into code compliance on a 5-4 basis? And so, I do hear the notion that we're already out of compliance, so why not do what we can to get it back into compliance, based upon what the code states. Councilmember Wei, you have your hand raised. Did you want to make a comment or suggestion at this time?
Yes, I would like to make a suggestion. I kind of like what John suggested, but instead of appoint 4 with 1 non-voting, let's just appoint 3 with a alternate a backup, and then when the 1 expires, just bring that person on board. Then we're in compliance.
I think we should just go for the straightforward. I mean, how much more time would we be out of compliance if we
Just 1 year,
appointed,
right?
the number
Or
that
I'm
we
okay
would.
with Vice Mayor's suggestion, just appoint 4. And then when the 1 goes away, then we're in compliance.
Well, appoint 4, and then when you have the 6 expire, I'll only get 5 more.
Yes.
Okay. I'm fine with that, actually. Councilmember Moore?
Okay, so if we do appoint 4, we'll have a total of 10.
We'll have 10.
And so the CEP, for example, has 4 members. It's an even number. So I was wondering if the city attorney could explain what happens in the event of a tie.
The CEP? What's the CEP?
The Housing Element Advisory Committee.
Okay.
Yeah, so most instances you need a majority of members present to pass an item out of commission. So if there were a tie, the item, the motion would fail.
Okay. Well, in any event, I think that's the most straightforward way to go about it. You just have 10, and it's kind of like asking someone to curtail their term by a year. I mean, I wouldn't want to put someone on unequal footing with the other 9 or the other members of the commission. So I'll put forward that motion that in this upcoming cycle we interview for 4 positions, and in the subsequent cycle we interview for 5 when the current 2-year cycles for the 6 are expired. And then that would set us back into compliance, a year out from now. Can I have a second for that?
I'll give you a second for that, but
Okay.
I'm also wondering, do we want to have any aspect of the municipal code changed to reflect this brief, for the period of, now until the next interview process, the commission will have 10 members or something like that?
If that's something that can be done fairly readily, I would be fine with changing the Muni Code, but I don't know exactly how that would read. I mean, because it would essentially carve out an exemption, or maybe this is what I suggest. I suggest that we direct our staff to come up with a resolution that we place on our agenda, and that basically explains for the historical record what we are doing and why we are doing it. So can we do that instead of having an ordinance to that effect?
So I think that a resolution is probably a good compromise. I mean, the issue with an ordinance is, of course, we'd have to bring it back, do a second reading, and then wait 30 days for it to take effect.
Right.
So that could certainly affect the timeline for interviews.
Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and change my motion to direct staff to bring back a resolution to us at our next regular meeting on May 3rd to that effect. And as a seconder, Councilmember Moore, will you accept that?
Yes.
Okay, so we have motion and second, and so we're going to bring this back, hopefully, on the consent. Can we bring this on the consent calendar, Chris? To potentially just move forward with this for May 3rd?
We could bring it on the consent calendar, or, we could bring the resolution forward at the time that you select the commissioners as well.
Okay. Okay, so we could proceed with, so why don't we proceed with the interviews, in a timely manner, first of all, and in a manner that doesn't delay the normal schedule, and then have the resolution come back, whatever, is most, consistent with that, that aim. Vice Mayor Chow?
So the current interview schedule is August 8th. I think that's before the school starts, and I wonder whether there are students who might not be back in town yet.
I think that, well, let me ask our city clerk, Kirsten, do we normally have teen commission interviews on that?
They're
in that month,
normally
in
in
August?
May, the last week in May, before their summer schedules begin, so
Right.
that they can attend. And so we thought that it would be helpful if we started before the school session begins, so that they would be able to focus on school when it begins. But really, there is no.
Well, how long is the notice period normally for applications?
At least. We like to give them at least a month, but 2 months would be ideal, because the rec staff liaison goes out to the schools. We notify in the scene.
Okay, so we're basically too late for May to have interviews for the teen commission.
That's what I recommend. I mean, that's my
Okay.
recommendation is that it's too late.
Okay.
So, Mayor, I forgot, they can actually attend virtually, right? So in case they're not back, they can attend the interview virtually. If it could be either in person or virtual, then probably that works.
I don't know if that's possible at that point. Chris, would you be able to speak to that? I would think that we have to assume that we're subjected to normal Brown Act rules at that point.
Well, yes, that may be the case, but as far as opposed to being on the commission, if they were just being interviewed,
Right.
they wouldn't require to be physically present, and so it would just be a matter of setting up the meeting to be a hybrid meeting.
Right, but it would be in a similar situation like this, where the council itself would be subjected to, assuming that the video conferencing protocols don't get extended at that point.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, so we would probably need to be live, or a majority of us would need to be live, and otherwise subjected to Brown Act, but the interviewees could be over video. Okay, well, Vice Mayor, it sounds like you were making a comment that you basically thought about and, essentially retracted. So let's go ahead and vote with our lights on the motion that's on the table.
I'm sorry, Mayor, may I ask clarification? Is council accepting the deadline, interview deadline?
As suggested, the
application
August interview schedule is
Okay,
what
tonight, okay.
is being recommended by your office.
Should we clarify that the interview will have the virtual option for attendees for the interviewee?
I think that can go out in the notice for the applications from the Teen Commission.
That doesn't need to be included in the motion? No?
I think if we go ahead and direct staff, in that manner, then the city clerk's office can make it clear in the notice that it will be a virtual interview if the applicant so chooses. All right. Okay. Please vote with your lights.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much, Madam City Clerk. All right, so we are continued for item number 20. Someone remind me, was it 28 or 29? I think it was item number 27, in fact.
27 for the work program.
Until 8 p.m. this Thursday, April 21st. Otherwise, we will adjourn the rest of the meeting that we continued under postponements to May 3rd. Thanks very much. Have a good night. Meeting adjourned.